Hi, and welcome to Writing 212X, Writing in the Professions. I'm your teacher, Joe Holt, and this is the first of our weekly recorded slideshows. This one addresses rhetoric in general and how our work in this class will fit in with the other sorts of writing you'll conduct at the university and the workplace. Thanks for signing up for this class. I'm looking forward to reading your work and getting to know each of you better. With these slideshows, I'll try and keep things brief, to the point, and I'll try and situate everything according to the assignments and documents we're composing in class. Our first slideshow is titled Rhetoric Intro. So what is rhetoric? Well, the idea of rhetoric has remained mostly unchanged since ancient times. At least the definition hasn't changed significantly. The Greeks, Aristotle especially, were concerned with how an audience was persuaded. Aristotle defined rhetoric as the art of finding the best available means of persuasion for a given situation. Rhetoric was introduced to American universities at Harvard in the 1880s. It's evolved so that today you can't attend any junior college, state school, or Ivy League school without being made to take a writing course. We call these courses general education because they're so essential to your success in college and in the workplace. As you already know, you're required to take these composition or first-year writing courses as part of your education at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. I'm assuming that you've taken Writing 111X, Writing Across Contexts, or its equivalent, and now you've had a choice about which 200-level writing course you'll take. Our work this semester will contrast and yet overlap with the work you might conduct in writing in the humanities, writing in the sciences, and arguing across contexts. In each of these classes, our goal is to make you a more effective written communicator. The difference among these classes is in the context for which you're being prepared to write. Here in 212X, we're studying professional and workplace writing, which, as the syllabus states, communicates with readers or users who need to solve a problem or complete a task. You can read the full syllabus yourself, but allow me briefly to state the rest of the learning outcomes, which say, in this course, we'll study audience needs, context of use, genre conventions, and clarity in writing. Much of our work will concern rhetorical assessment and how we can tailor our communications to achieve our purposes for writing. Through this work, we'll explore how to develop a research plan, evaluate secondary sources, and present your findings using MLA or APA citation style. Similarly, we'll discuss how to avoid plagiarism and establish your writerly ethos. So why do we study rhetoric? Because you will benefit by practicing skills you can apply to a variety of writing situations. In your writing classes, we are not teaching you to fill in the blanks, but rather respond critically to the challenges and constraints of many different writing tasks. Our course is not a trivia course or a recitation course, but rather one where you'll be asked to apply rhetorical strategies, techniques, and theories. In writing, we'll learn there is never one single correct answer, but rather degrees of effectiveness and nuance. Through our work this semester, we hope to gain not a store of knowledge, but rather a malleable skill set. Like with any craft, we hope to improve through continued practice. You are, however, by virtue of simply being alive and attentive in the world today, perhaps a more skilled communicator than you might think. Here, in these boxes, are what we might call means or methods of communication. There are different purposes and contexts for each one. They vary in technology, delivery methods, and levels of formality. For instance, you might shoot a quick text message to your roommate, but you might send a longer handwritten letter to your grandmother. You might call your mechanic to ask about when your car repairs will be done, or you might email your department advisor about setting up a meeting. And you don't really need to think about which method you'll use for each rhetorical task. It becomes second nature with practice. Further, with practice, you become more fluent. Like if you're new to Twitter, that is, text-based social media, there's a small learning curve about how users punctuate, abbreviate, and cite within their tweets. In that way, we can think of Twitter as a discourse community, or a group that has its own rules and practices for how to communicate. You don't worry about MLA style when you're writing a tweet. By extension, neither do you write lowercase i's or employ meme language when you're writing a college term paper. By recognizing the context for communication, you adapt to your understanding of that discourse community. Another term for this is code switching. An example is how I say snow machine when I'm up here in Alaska, but snowmobile when I'm talking with my friends and family down in South Dakota. So which of these communication methods are most common? Probably those that are facilitated through our phones or computers. Which are most meaningful? Well, that's a different story. It can be socially stressful making a phone call or having a face-to-face discussion, but we usually solve problems more quickly and efficiently that way. Maybe like me, you've had the experience where you spend 20 minutes crafting an email and finally you go, screw this, I'm going to call them and settle this in 2 minutes. As the previous slide noted, you are already a skilled communicator. You know how to navigate among different media and you know how to adapt your communication for different contexts. In this slide, we'll glance at some of the skills and practices that define the ways we communicate today in the digital era. First, writing has gotten more collaborative, both in the classroom and the workplace. We can collaborate more effectively due to advances in technology. Consider how multiple people can access and edit a Google Doc at the same time. In college, we sometimes have group projects, which can be a headache because everyone gets the same grade and sometimes the work doesn't get distributed fairly. However, that's pretty representative of how writing works in the business world, where a corporate memo or a copywriting blurb will pass through multiple hands on its way to completion. For what it's worth, we won't have group projects in our online class this semester, but we would if we were an in-person class. We will conduct peer review workshops, which are, of course, a type of collaboration. Next, you know how to multitask, so to speak, when writing. You can address multiple audiences and you can achieve multiple purposes. Take this example. Say you're the vice president of the fencing club here at UAF. Yes, we have a fencing club. And you need to create a flyer announcing your upcoming recruitment meeting. Well, your main purpose with writing is to communicate the who, what, and when of the meeting. That way your readers will have no confusion if they plan to attend. Your primary purpose is to inform. But also, if it's a recruitment meeting, you want to convince new people to show up. In that case, your secondary purpose is to persuade. You might need to anticipate their questions about the length of the meeting, the cost of membership, the fencing experience required to be part of the club. It always helps attendance, I find, to have pizza at meetings. Similarly, if you're posting this flyer at the Wood Center, you know many people will read it. Students, staff, faculty, even campus visitors, and you want to represent yourself and your organization professionally. Briefly, you also know how to locate information quickly. However, that means your readers do as well. Encyclopedic knowledge isn't that valuable today because we all have access to the entire internet on our phones. Readers are unimpressed with bare facts, and they often request interpretation of those facts. So when we write, we want to address the specific needs and knowledge of our readers. Doing so indicates that we've considered how our message can be helpful to them. Because technology has gotten better, we're able to incorporate visual rhetoric into our messages. That means we design our documents as much as we craft the specific words. When office work was conducted on typewriters, most documents looked the same. But now with desktop publishing, it's much easier to introduce graphics and textual emphasis to get our points across. For instance, glance at our course syllabus. You'll see how I employed section headings, bold typeface, and graphic tables. I did this so that you, my readers, would be able to skim the document more easily, locate the information you're seeking, and understand it with a minimum of effort. We as writers want to make our readers' jobs easy. When readers have so many demands on their attention, we don't want to hide our main points or make things more difficult than necessary. We do so by creating vibrant, accessible documents when the genre conventions allow it. Finally, we recognize that readers respond best to writing that is concise, direct, and error-free. That style of writing lessens confusion, and it demonstrates that you've considered your readers' priorities. Further, you establish your writerly ethos, a term we'll look at in a few slides, by the approach you take and the tone you establish. We'll find that readers respond best to writing that appears conversational, clear, and accessible. It takes practice, of course, to write in this manner, but we get better with revision and editing. We've already stated that as a college student today, you are constantly writing and communicating. These boxes indicate the obvious applications of writing. Some academic, like completing assignments. Some administrative, like contacting your professors. some extracurricular, like participating in campus organizations, some professional, like applying to jobs and scholarships, and some social, like presenting yourself on social media. In many ways, we grow as individuals and define ourselves by how we communicate. It's how we think of ourselves and how others see us. So the next question is, how effectively do you communicate? And to follow up on that, how might you improve your communication so that you can open up new opportunities in your academic, professional, and personal pursuits? I'll say now, effective communication is often the result of conscientious effort. It takes effort to compose a clean email. It takes effort to write a strong term paper. It even takes effort to craft an Instagram post that gets authentic likes. Good writing comes from drafting, editing, revising, and proofreading. It's never easy, but it gets easier once we recognize what's at stake and once we commit to devoting the proper energy and effort into our writing. Now, of all the boxes on this slide, you complete most of them like they're second nature. You hardly need to think about them. And in this class, we want to slow down our thinking. We'll analyze the daily common events of writing and reading so that we better understand our audience and purpose, that our intuition guides us more truly, and that our communication is naturally more effective. Now onto a more specific discussion of how we're situating our work this semester in writing and the professions. Our goal is to develop the practical skills that will help you succeed when you're writing on the job. And yet, there's so much variety in the workplaces you might enter, and it's so hard predicting the technologies that will shape those workplaces that we really shouldn't think in terms of hard and fast rules. Again, effective writing is never completed by filling in the blanks. But it's useful for our needs to consider the various genres of workplace writing, all of which have different conventions and expectations. These genres include letters, memos, and emails, reports, proposals, and evaluations, newsletters, articles, and websites, press releases, grants and instructional manuals, brochures, agendas, and resumes. Confusing? Even more so when we consider that each form has its own special set of formatting and usage demands. Your reader has expectations for whichever form you choose. For example, even though newsletters and press releases are both journalistic in style, they have very different purposes. A newsletter is used for internal communication, like within a company, whereas a press release is distributed outside the company. But once you immerse yourself in your office culture, these expectations become clearer. Write a few memos and memo formatting is no longer so mysterious. Likewise with big reports or website copy. Our textbook will serve as a reference for the differences among these document genres, and truly the lines blur. In fact, many of these documents have been swallowed up into the catch-all category of web content. You can find more information about our assignment sequence on the syllabus and on our Blackboard site. Aside from the Quick Writes discussion forums, we're composing a cover letter and resume, a technical description, which is like a brochure/report, a progress report, which will be formatted as a memo, a white paper, which is a type of formal expository report, and a slideshow presentation to conclude the semester. We have just a few slides remaining. This one covers some of the main terms that are integral to assessing a rhetorical situation. These are not new terms for you, and their meanings aren't particularly specialized. Nonetheless, we want to get in the habit of using them fluently. For all of your major assignments this semester, we will contextualize your documents according to real-world rhetorical circumstances. That means you're creating them for a class, of course, but we want to imagine that you could send them, whether digitally or by print, to actual people. First, your audience is the receiver of your message or communication. When you're typing an email, you need to put someone's address in the to line. Or, if you're sending out your cover letter and resume, you know the manager or HR department at that company will be your reader. Audience gets a bit more nebulous, however, when you're sending emails or memos with multiple recipients, or when you're submitting a scholarship application to a vague review committee, or when you're posting web content online. Our textbook describes more about audience in Chapter 3, which we'll get to in a couple weeks. Next, your purpose is essentially what you're hoping to accomplish with your communication. A purpose can always be stated in an infinite verb form. For instance, to notify, to announce, to answer, to inquire, to clarify. In general terms, our textbook says on page 7 that technical documents will have one of three purposes: informational, instructional, or persuasive. Like with audience, Chapter 3 of our textbook addresses the concept further. When we understand our audience and purpose, we're better prepared to craft our message. We know who's reading and how we want them to respond. Finally, two similar terms, content and context. Content refers to the main informational points of your communication. What are you saying? Context refers to the medium of communication. In what form or format are you saying it? Think of a coffee cup filled up with coffee. The cup itself is the context, or the vessel that holds the coffee, which is the content. When you're applying for a job, a resume is the context for holding your personal details, the content. Context matters in a couple different ways. First, it means you understand the social, political, and economic constraints of your correspondence. Second, it suggests that you adhere to the genre expectations, which we discussed on the previous slide, for a particular document. If that sounds like a lot to consider in theory, it gets easier once we look into specific writing examples. We won't get too deep in the weeds about rhetorical theory this semester, but here are a couple visual aids with which you might be familiar. Very briefly, let's look at the one on the right, the rhetorical triangle. Recall that Aristotle's definition of rhetoric was finding the best available means of persuasion for a given situation. We have three strategies or methods for persuading our audience. These are ethos, pathos, and logos. An argument might be based in any combination of these three. Ethos refers to an appeal to the expertise or trustworthiness of the communicator. An example would be the celebrity endorsement. Pathos refers to an emotional appeal or an appeal to the beliefs and values of the audience. An appeal would be an ad for PETA that shows puppies and baby rabbits and then says that eating meat is wrong. Finally, logos refers to appeals based on logic or evidence. An example is a high school science fair where a student carefully organizes the results of her experiment onto her poster. The rhetorical stance would argue that successful communication balances 1, the voice, personality, or implied character of the speaker, 2, the interests and peculiarities of the audience, and 3, the logical arguments about the subject itself. We're a little more interested in the triangle on the left, which we call the communication triangle. In viewing this visual aid, we should recognize first that all three of these elements, communicator, audience, and message, are necessary for an active communication, and second, that these three elements are in a dynamic relationship. What do I mean by that? Let's look at an example. Consider that you're preparing a message about the benefits of vegetables. Your purpose is twofold: to inform your audience about those benefits and to persuade them to eat more vegetables. Well, we want to craft our message, but it helps to know our audience. Say you're explaining the benefits of vegetables to your 5-year-old nephew. You'll probably define vegetable. They're the green foods. You would use short, easy words. And you would use generalities like, eat these and you can grow up and be strong. Now imagine that you're explaining the benefits of vegetables to your father, who's at risk for coronary disease. You'll be specific about the consequences of poor diet. You might use bigger, more complex words. You might make an emotional appeal. Dad, we care about you. And you'll take on a greater role as listener, hearing his concerns and addressing them. So that should show how one corner of the triangle, the message, changes when we shift another corner, the audience. Final slide here. This one is meant as brainstorming. I know I said we can't reduce writing to fill in the blanks, but I'm asking you to do that here. When you're faced with a writing task, you might complete this sentence, which should force you to define your purpose and consider how you want your readers to respond. If we were an in-person class, we might work through our first assignment sheet, the cover letter and resume, to answer these questions. For now, however, just file away this idea and return if ever you feel stuck wrapping your head around a particular writing task. That sentence, of course, is an oversimplification. A few slides back, we mentioned that you often juggle multiple audiences and purposes. It can also help to consider these additional questions. The second and third questions especially should lead you to consider your audience and their needs. By considering your audience's needs, you also begin determining your content, structure, and tone of the message. The first five chapters of our textbook will be really useful in preparing you to write for a number of different purposes and contexts. A lot to take in this first week, but our slideshow here is just meant as an overview of certain concepts we'll return to throughout the semester. In writing in the professions, we're doing practical work, meaning the theories are to be applied or practiced. This first week of the semester, you should scope out our Blackboard site, read the syllabus, and post to the first Quick Writes forum. Our first assignment is the cover letter and resume, so you might look over that assignment sheet as well. I'll be back next week with another slideshow. Thanks for watching this one, and I'm looking forward to our work together this semester.